Hello and welcome to our first episode of The Office Hours. We're at the Dartmouth College Admissions Office in Hanover, New Hampshire, and this is our first edition of our brand new online show called The Office Hours Dartmouth Edition, where we will be chatting with just a member of the Dartmouth community each week and giving you all a perspective pretty unique to Dartmouth. So, my name is Chris O'Connell, and I'm a 13. At Dartmouth, we go by our class year. So that means I just finished my first year at the college, and I'm heading into my sophomore year now. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a geography and international studies major, and pretty involved with the admissions office. And I'm here today with Josiah Proietti, who is one of our community directors. He's worked at Dartmouth for a few years now in the Office of Residential Life, which is dorms and all that fun stuff when you come to college. And he's here to talk to us today about kind of your residential experience at college and kind of how that works. There's definitely I think a lot of people are really worried about the academic transition coming to college and getting used to classes, but I think a really big part of college is outside the classroom. I don't know if you, what you guys talk about as community directors, but I feel like that's a really big concern for a lot of students. And so, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do as a community director? What does that even mean?
Sure. Community director is really intentionally named because on lots of other college campuses there are resident directors or area coordinators. Here at Dartmouth we have the luck and the richness of our administration that the community directors are all about what's happening in the residence hall as it pertains to people getting to know each other, building a sense of belonging. Really it is. I mean, everybody longs to belong somewhere. And that's certainly no different for first years or any student that comes to campus. So what it's about is how can we best create an environment where every single student feels like when they come back to their residence hall, they feel like they're coming home. You know, they feel like they have people that will support them, people that will allow them to study, sleep, you know, learn about interesting things in and outside the classroom.
It's funny because one of my best memories, like the first time I came to Dartmouth, was when I first arrived on campus for my orientation trip. There's this big banner that welcomes you to campus when you arrive for freshman orientation. It says "Welcome Home" and your class year. So for me, it said "Welcome Home 13s." And I remember thinking, I was like, "Oh, what a cheesy banner." And then after kind of like meeting my floor and like having my UGA, which is an undergraduate advisor, which is kind of the Dartmouth equivalent of an RA, which is what they have at a lot of other schools. I think that definitely is like one big focus that I've noticed, is that kind of building that sense of community. So in addition to you all as community directors, who else is there kind of in the residence halls with students when they first get here?
Sure. I'm glad you mentioned sort of RA versus UGA. I'm sure a lot of you out there have heard that there's a resident assistant on lots of college campuses, and our version of that is the UGA, which stands for undergraduate advisor, and once again intentionally named to communicate a little bit of a difference. Resident assistants on some campuses will be focusing on health and safety and community. Certainly our UGAs do that as well, but the UGAs have a cool component where they're really not as responsible for writing people up, for example. So they don't do regular rounds around the campus. They are primarily there to make sure people are happy, safe, getting to know each other, and getting the information they need to navigate a very new system for first years. So they will be, some of their tasks include putting up informational bulletin boards to keep people informed. They'll make programs happen to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to interact, learn something that they might not learn because they're not taking a class in a particular subject. So it's not uncommon for UGAs to have professors come into the residence halls, and the professor has an interesting research topic or knows somebody in the residence hall, and they have these great programs where you sit down, you have a snack or a meal, and get to learn firsthand from some of the finest researchers in the country what they're doing and why they're passionate about it.
Oh, that's really cool. I had an interesting experience my freshman year. My UGA invited one of his professors over, and we had Chinese food. It was really fun. I mean, it was free, which is great. I'm all for free food. And then afterwards, we chatted with her, and I think it was a little weird because she soon realized that everyone on my floor was born the year she graduated from Dartmouth, and she was like, "Oh my God, I'm so old." But it was really fun. We got to talk about like her research and stuff, and then we went over and watched the showing of Dartmouth Idol, which is kind of like our spoof on American Idol here on campus. And so there's like a lot of those kind of programs, right? Like what else? So you can I guess what else do UGAs do? I mean, there's so many cool like events they put on.
Well, in terms of programming, it's just such a wide gamut. It can be anywhere from a UGA coming onto a floor and getting 4 or 5 people interested in going to the dining hall and say, like, let's go, let's talk about how things are going. I mean, that can constitute some kind of program, that intentional interaction, all the way to, you know, full-scale, whole cluster-wide programs. And we use this term cluster to represent a little group of buildings. And that's a way for you to get to know your floor, but understand that you're part of a larger community, which is your cluster, and then even understand you're part of a larger community, which is Dartmouth. And so knowing those connections, and all the programs go anywhere between. I've heard of really fun ones like Poker with the Profs, where you get to learn how to play poker, and yeah, I mean, obviously it's not gambling for money, but you have snacks, and you get to learn how to play a game if you don't already know how to play a game. There are dances, there are karaoke nights, there are movie nights, there are excursions out into the world. You know, we've got this beautiful setting in Hanover, New Hampshire, and there's lots of beautiful wilderness to explore, anywhere from 20-minute hikes to canoeing down the river. All these things are happening constantly to make sure that the students are stimulated outside the classroom.
Right. Yeah. That's really cool. Let's back up a little bit. So when I decided to come to Dartmouth, I filled a little survey over the summer, and it's like, you know, like a roommate survey, and I know every school does a little differently. I know some schools it's kind of that you're in this little like social network, and you have to like find a roommate who's compatible, like request them, and then they request you back, and it's almost like the online dating system or something. But how does it work in Dartmouth in terms of getting a roommate, finding a room? Like how does that work?
Yeah, well, you'll share a certain number of things about yourself, similarly to your experience, I'm assuming, which includes, you know, what your preferences are for sleep schedules and things like that. But beyond that, for first years, there's specific kinds of housing. So we have a substance-free housing option if you're particularly interested in having a community that is committed to making sure the floor is completely substance-free. That's an option. But beyond that, all first years are paired up based on that information that you give housing. And once you're paired up, I hear that a lot of times you can look up your new roommate on Facebook and connect with them early before you even get here and talk about sharing the space and how to make the space as best you can make it.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. So I know for me, I look at my survey, and I filled it out and got a roommate, and I was like, maybe residential life was like playing a joke on me, because my roommate and I had nothing in common. Yeah. But then I soon realized like it kind of works depending on like, you know, on your situation and on your personality. And that even though it's, you know, like room with a person who's exactly like you, it still is definitely like a functional type of thing. As a community director, though, you obviously interact with a lot of different pairs of roommates or groups of roommates. And I guess how does that kind of play out with some people? Do you have to be best friends with your roommate to make it work? Or?
No, not at all. And in fact, some of the best roommate pairings I've ever seen are good functional roommates, like you said, where they're very respectful of each other's space, but not necessarily, you know, BFFs, like best friends forever, where they're doing absolutely everything together. Of course, that happens a lot. I mean, by proximity, you meet some fantastic people on your floor, and if they happen to be in your room as well, we of course encourage that. We want the lasting relationships that will go forth into to the rest of your life. But a note about our core value, you know, we really value multicultural perspectives where lots of different ideas can coexist in the same space. So we encourage every roommate pairing to find the ways that they're similar and find the ways that they're different, to be able to celebrate those differences. And yes, sometimes they result in conflicts, but there are so many resources on campus for people to mediate if there are conflicts, including the UGA and the community director. So in all cases, we want people to celebrate the difference, enjoy living with each other, and you, like you said, you know, you'd be surprised at how much you can enjoy someone's company, even if they're very, very different than you. And the richness of our community comes from that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool. So I think a lot of people probably want to know, like, what exactly the space it looks like. And I know you talk about clusters and kind of it's a little grouping of buildings, and there's 5 residential clusters for first year students, and pretty much kind of randomly assigned to one of the 5, with the exception of one of them, which we'll talk about in a sec. But I know there's so many different kind of setups for freshmen. there's really no standard Dartmouth dorm, is there?
It's really not. I mean, we're such an old institution that we've got buildings that have been around for a really long time, and of course have been refurbished over the years.
Don't worry. We still have plumbing, electricity.
Yeah, you know, we have running water and everything. But it's everything from, you know, a building that's been around for a long time that's got a lot of character. You walk in and you see billboards of champions, championships past. So there'll be, you know, advertisements for whoever was the the basketball champion for the intramural sports in 1982, those kinds of fun things, all the way to buildings that have been built very recently where they have really cool air systems where they get thermal heat. They're very minded of sustainability and making cutting edge places to live. The physical space, every single place at Dartmouth was very intentional to have social space and study space included into the residence halls. So on every floor, you'll have, not absolutely every floor, but it's certainly every building has a little room where you can go. You need to, it's late night, it's snowing outside, you don't want to go to the, you don't want to go to the library, you just tuck yourself into one of those places. And of course, every residence hall has large open areas, some larger than others, but these are great, fantastic, meeting, common living ground areas where people can come together and meet each other and live and learn.
And I know for me, I lived in a 2-room double, which was kind of nice because then we each kind of had our own room, but then at the same time, like, obviously I had to still like share the space a little bit. And now I'm in a suite, so I have a common room with 2 other roommates, and so just know that every Dartmouth dorm and every term and wherever you live on campus is going to be pretty much different from every other term where you live on campus. So there's so much variety in that. So you're randomly assigned essentially to one of those 5 clusters. Now, what's the exception is we have a program called East Wheelock, and lucky you, people behind the camera, because he is the community director for East Wheelock.
Just happens so.
And can kind of give us some insight on what exactly what is East Wheelock, and why is there an application for it?
Yeah. So East Wheelock is a program that was devised about 10 years ago, where a group of students and faculty got together and realized there are some on our campus that want an academic living learning component right in the residence hall. And so this is a community that is built intentionally on the recognition that we want the learning experience to travel almost through our entire time at Dartmouth, which includes when we come home to our residence hall. So some of the neat components of the East Wheelock program are we have a cluster dean and faculty fellows that live right inside the building, right next to the building. There's a really cool building called the White House, which is right next to the East Wheelock cluster.
Not that White House.
House. Right. It's and it actually doesn't look like the Washington D.C. White House, but that's what we call it, as a term of endearment. And every time, so the faculty fellows will have people from the Hop. If there are performers that come by, they'll do special concerts that come right into the White House, and students will be invited to come. And it'll be a four-person musical group performing for 20 people in a living room. Oh, wow. And there's question and answer, and food, of course, provided at these kinds of events. So that's one component. We have this really personal experience with nationally and internationally acclaimed artists, which is very, very neat. The other things we have are Cluster Council and Service Corps, and these are student-run groups. The Cluster Council gets together every week and tries to figure out what the cluster needs for programming. So they're another facet of the community that are bringing in faculty members and making social programs happen. Service Corps is a group of students that meet every week and figure out ways to give service back to the community. So they're constantly figuring out local areas, local establishments where community service hours can be provided, and they do all sort of the structural work. So if I'm an East Wheelock resident and I want to show up on that Saturday and serve meals for the morning, that option is just made really easy to basically facilitate the opportunity to give back to the community. So you ask why we need people to apply for this. We need people to be intentionally curious and engaged and excited about being part of this kind of community, because with all these different events and extra things happening, we need people to attend. We need people to be there and participating and enjoying it and making the experience more rich. Because without people there, it won't change lives.
Right. That's cool. And so the other 4 clusters then beyond East Wheelock, they kind of each have their own like little personality and like quirks and pros and cons, probably like most other places. So it's funny because I feel like, you know, just finishing up my freshman year, a lot of people, and meeting the new incoming freshmen now, and I hear where they're living, I'm like, oh, like, that's great, it's so close to the gym, or like, that's really nice, because it's like a nice, like, view from your window, because it's a tall building or something. But what are kind of, I guess, the pros and cons of each, but I guess as a community director, when people are unhappy about where they're placed, or you know, how do you kind of mitigate that?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, I mean, my first response is let's start with the river, right? Why not? The river is the term for a group of buildings right down near the Connecticut River. It's not right on the water; it's not waterfront property. But a lot of the students, when they first get there, think that it's a lot farther away from campus than a lot of other clusters. So the feedback we often get is, oh, well, I don't like being here because I have to walk so far. The really cool thing that happens every single year is that community ends up having a special identity because they've got almost something, you know, not to endure, because I personally think it's not that much farther away than everywhere else.
I will say that I think our sense of distance changes a lot of Dartmouth. Coming here, since it's very, very much a walking campus, when things are more than like a 3-minute walk, you're like, oh my god, it's so far.
Right.
It's so far away, I can't go there. And in reality, it's like a quarter mile. So, yeah, when we say the river's far, it's like not really that far.
Yeah,
but,
it's,
okay, all right.
It's never going to take you more than 10 minutes to get from one spot to another spot on campus. But everything's relative, right? So if you've got your peers living sort of right in the heart of it, it's tough to feel like you're not on the outskirts living in a place like that. But I think the insight there is that every cluster that has a common concern or a common reason why someone might not want to live there ends up being this really wonderful source for community, wonderful source for connection. Time and time again, like clusters like the Choates, clusters like the River, have higher levels of people that make floor T-shirts, right? Things like that, where we see that sometimes in other clusters, but for some reason, we see them more often in the clusters that have that solidarity that comes from, oh, well, this is an older building, or oh, this is a building that's a little farther away from the campus. So that's the pro and con. You have the endurance, but you get the connection. You can say, I did this, and I did this with my with my compatriots.
It's funny because one of my good friends lived in Russell Sage, which was a little bit older of a building, I think, in one of the other clusters, and she had a really interesting perspective on it. Is that every time we had a big weekend on campus, and there was a lot of alumni who came back, she got the biggest kick out of talking to alums who lived in her building, and these are alums from like the 60s or the 70s, the 80s, and she's like. There's one story that kind of stands out in my mind where she walked up to a alum and this guy was like, oh, I used to live in like the 4th floor of Russell Sage, and then my friend, that's where she had lived freshman year. And the guy was like, do you still, ice over the stairwells and go skating down the stairs? And she's like, no, why would we do that? And like people have all these crazy stories because it's kind of a little bit of an older building, but it has all that kind of like rich tradition and history, which is kind of fun.
And what a fantastic icebreaker, right? I mean, what a wonderful way to connect with alums and get the conversation flowing. Yeah. I guess one of the other first year's halls that we didn't mention was the McLaughlin cluster, one of the newest first year halls. So people really like the space because it's so state of the art. But it's what's really neat about that is that it's upper class and first years living in the same space. So there's wonderful opportunities for first years to be mentored by upper class as well. So that's one of the cool things that happens there.
But you still have a freshman room, correct?
Yes, okay. Absolutely. Okay. All first years are on first year floors, in fact. And that's very intentional because we have a program. I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time to talk about the FIRE program.
Sure.
But yeah, the FIRE program stands for First Year Residence Hall Experience. So not FIRE, but fire with a Y. And what this is all about is that it's a comprehensive program that recognizes that our first years have a lot in common in terms of the challenges that they go through. And so we have weekly floor meetings where a UGA will get a fire floor together and talk about the social scene, talk about advising at Dartmouth, talk about navigating their first big weekend, right, where the actual fire happens. We have the bonfire at homecoming, which is just a fabulous event that we have here. And every single challenge that comes up, the students have an opportunity to think about it beforehand, plan the way they want to experience this, and then get to reflect again on the other side of that, because they come back next week and they get to say, wow, this happened, and I didn't think it was going to happen that way, or this totally worked out and you should try this way too. It's this way to navigate and make your Dartmouth experience personal, but also share it with a group of people.
That's really cool. Yeah, I know my floor, all freshman floors, I guess, technically are fire floors, and everyone is a first year student is kind of part of that program, but it's really fun to kind of go through all those things together, all those traditions and events that happen freshman year. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is, it's really cool how kind of cohesive and tight of a community your freshman floor can be. But as a community director, I'm sure you've seen your fair share of challenging issues with people, not necessarily with their roommates per se, but maybe just on their floor they weren't enjoying it as much as they thought they were, that kind of thing. What are kind of the big challenges that students face, especially that first year in terms of that residential / like social transition to college? What do you guys do to help them?
Sure. Well, I want to start with the college's mission, which is we are here to train the leaders of tomorrow, right? And so with that prism to look at this issue through, every time there's an interpersonal conflict on a floor, whether it be between one person and another person on the floor, roommates, a person with an entire community, what these constitute are value conflicts. And since we are training the leaders of tomorrow, our first and foremost, every single time something like this happens, is what can we do to solve this problem here and now? What's going on for each of the students? Let's find out the richness of the narratives, of everybody's narrative, and see if there can be some mediation or compromise, because this won't be the last time that these students have to face some kind of conflict in their lives.
Right.
And if we fail them in that environment, they won't be the leaders of tomorrow. So that's the big lofty philosophical response. But to get right down to the ground truth, when two people have a conflict, if we can't solve it, if it's a values conflict that is too deep, or if we recognize that some resident isn't feeling psychologically safe or doesn't feel physically, for whatever reason, we have a fantastic housing department that is ready and willing to help people into alternative spaces. And that I also would mention that even in an emergency situation, we have the ability to make sure residents are safe at all times. So although it's a very small portion of students that end up actually moving, because the majority of conflicts end up being resolved, whether it be because the UJ steps in or the CD steps in, and helps facilitate that experience. We have the capability of making sure everyone is safe and in an environment they can handle.
Oh, good to know. Don't worry, you'll be great. You'll be fine inside within your residence halls. So 2 final questions. One came from our chat over here, and they want to know how the D plan is such a strong part of the Dartmouth kind of experience, and that's our flexible academic schedule system, where it's a quarter system, and so especially sophomore and junior year, there's some people they are on campus in the fall, then away in the winter, then back in the spring. And how does it work with housing and where you live during all that kind of those transitions?
Sure. I mean, in your upper class years, you will, if you're on for the fall and off for the winter, housing will be in close contact with you about how to apply for winter housing, so that when you come back, you're ready and you'll have a warm bed to move into. So that's sort of how the D plan impacts it. And sometimes you'll be living in lots of different places. There's a pros and cons to that. The con is that you don't get that sense of continuity or solidarity with the same people each time. The plus is that you meet a lot more people and you get to see a lot more of the campus. And some people really enjoy it, and some people don't enjoy it. It's all how you navigate the experience. But one thing I did want to, I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought on that one. We were talking about the D plan and, the lottery.
Right.
The housing lottery, right. So we guarantee housing for first years and sophomores. And for upper class students, there's a lottery system where you're given a number, and that number will determine in what order you pick your housing. We do this because students get to know the housing very, very well, and they know what they want. And so the only fair way we can think of doing it is having that lottery system, and you come up when your number is called, and you pick the best room that you can think of that's still left over after all the people choose before you.
And don't worry, there's a bunch of great rooms, so even if you have the last lottery number like I did this year, you will still find a great room. So seniors have the first pick after freshman year, then juniors, and then sophomore. So it's almost like the only way you wouldn't get a room sophomore or junior or senior year if you didn't want one.
Yeah, so, absolutely. And we have systems like a wait list. If you didn't get the room that you really wanted, you have the option to put in for a room change request right then and there. You have the option to not even pick a room and be put on a wait list with preferences, asking, if a room like this opens up, well, everybody's D plan changes and all that stuff changes. Please consider me, and they'll do that for you too.
Oh, cool. Another quick thing I want to just get your thoughts on is another housing option after freshman year is there's affinity programs. And so my understanding is that it's kind of an more academic connection with where you live, similar, I guess, to East Rock, in the sense that there's that connection there between the classroom experience and the out of classroom experience. But what are some of those options? I know there's like a bunch of them.
It's really wonderful. There's over a dozen of them, and what I'll do to answer the question is there's two major kinds. There's ones that are supported by an academic department that have live-in faculty. So the Chinese language house is something like this.
You don't necessarily have to be of like Chinese heritage to live there, right?
Exactly, exactly. What you do need to be is committed to learning more about the language, and a lot of the language learning houses, you'll practice the language as much as possible, sort of as an immersion program, you know, to get you really comfortable with that language. But there are other, for example, there are other housing programs and affinities that do not have a department that's attached to it, but are somehow an affinity around cultural set of values or some sort of identity that you don't have to have, but you want to learn more about.
This is one of my good friends decided kind of on a whim almost, to live in the SLC, the Sustainable Living Center. I think it's that kind of a good example for your...
Fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. If you might not know a lot about sustainability or environmental movements, but you plop yourself down in the middle of a house where all the students are working together to get awareness up, to make sure that they're living by values that make sense for the earth, and they are constantly doing changes to their house to make sure that the house is more eco-friendly. And yeah, if you know nothing about it, you can immerse yourself once again and enjoy that. The last one that I'll mention are affinity programs that happen right in our residence halls. And the perfect example of this is the gender-neutral housing option. This is cutting-edge housing option where you can, if you want to be on this floor, you don't necessarily have to live with the same sex in your room. And this is really exciting for people that want to learn more about gender issues, learn, you know, all different kinds of things. This is a programmatic affinity where they will have programs that have to do with gender issues as well, so you can learn all about that and immerse yourself in that way too.
Right, and the cool thing I think across all those affinities is if you know nothing about it, you can just kind of go in there and check it out. Right?
Absolutely,
that's really cool.
And if you know if it doesn't blend with your preferences, we're on a quarter system here. There's not a lot of time, and you can always move into another place.
Great. Well, lastly, we only have a few minutes.
Sure.
And want to just get kind of as a community director, and you've been a CD for a few years now. What has been kind of one of those really cool experiences or standout moments, I guess, that has kind of stood out, I guess, in the past 4 or 5 years that you've been here?
Oh, yeah.
In terms of interacting with students.
Yeah. I'll just take one from today, you know, because basically they happen every single day. We just finished up UGA training. We spend a week with the UGAs and get them all ready for the fall. And we had having our closing barbecue. And right at the end, we had a particular cluster of UGAs jump up and come up to me and say, Josiah, we want to do a dance and a song to close this out. And I had no idea what was going on. I was like, you know what, run with it.
Only here.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, well, go for it. And they stomped up, and they're you know, they've got this fantastic dance they're doing all in unison that they worked out late last night to give a send off to all the UGAs. And you know, we're clapping. There's an uproar. There's this wonderful surge of energy that comes directly from the energy of the students. You know, exactly where else are you going to get that kind of student spontaneity where it's happening and you just get to see the brilliance of the students.
Right, that's really cool. That's awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming to talk with us today. I really appreciate it. So the office hours will be back on Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time with our student forum, our student edition. And so essentially this is a time on Thursday where you can come in with all your questions, and it's essentially one big Q&A just to help you out. And so start thinking of those questions over the next 2 days, and we'll be back right here on the Dartmouth website at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday. Thanks so much.